Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be creating a weight tracker because recently a bunch of friends and myself have been trying to lose weight. So people keep sending me all of their weights in like graph form. So I thought it might be cute to make a little weight tracker as well. This is going to allow you to sign in as a specific user and then you can track your weights as needed. You also have the ability to convert between kilograms and pounds if you want to. This is tracked in a session cookie, so you can like come up here and delete the cookie if you want to reset it, or just switch back to kilograms. You can also, because this is an Apex chart, very easily switch to different time periods. We can like zoom in on a specific period. You get the idea. The actual weight change here, the weight units, if we refresh, will persist, but the date will pull back to the last 7 days just because that's what made the most sense to me. We can also come over to the weights themselves. You can see here, these are all now in pounds. If I come back to the home and I switch this to kilograms, we are using this throughout the whole application. So this does allow you to see all of these. The conversion does happen on the client side because I prefer to do it that way as opposed to on the server side. And then we can come in here, we can convert this to kilograms if we want to, and then you can change this. Maybe you weigh 82.00 kilograms, right? And then you can see this gets updated to 180.77 pounds, which is probably correct. Okay. So that's that. I have the Pagey gem here, which is what we're using for the pagination. I do style that a bit. And then I have the Smith machine that I ordered open for some reason, but we can probably close that and actually get started on the application itself. So I'm going to stop the server, CD out of here, do a Rails new with video-c Tailwind because we're using Tailwind. Need to use chruby again. And then we can do this. I really need to switch over to ASDF. Alrighty, so now let's go ahead and let's CD into the video, run a code dot to open this up in VS Code, and then let's see how quickly we can spin up an application like this. So to get started, we need to do a Rails G scaffold. We're going to generate a weight scaffold, but first, before we do this, I'm realizing we need to add Devise. So let's do that before we do anything else. Let's do a bundle add Devise because we need the user account since we're saying the weights will belong to a user. So let's make sure we do this in the right order. Otherwise, you're going to run into some problems with your database dependencies later. So now that we have that, let's do a Rails G Devise install, just like this. And then we can do a Rails G Devise user, just like that. That'll give us our user models. Now that we have that, we can do our Rails G scaffold weight. We're going to give each weight a value. That's the actual numerical value. A date. This is different from the created at because you might create a weight today, but it might be for a week ago. So we need you to be able to select a week ago while still having the created at date. Then we say this belongs to a user. That way, you know, not everyone can see everyone else's weights. And then we're going to have the unit here, which is just going to be kilograms or pounds. We'll go ahead and we'll run that. Now, before we run our database migration, let me make sure I set my GitHub stuff. We need to come into our DB, our migrate, and the weights migration because the unit here needs to have a default of kg, just because I want to store it all as kilograms. So we'll do that. And then we can come up here to the app, the models, and the weight, and we can start in the weight model itself. Okay, so in here, there's a couple things that I want to do. First thing that I really want to just get out of the way is make sure that we have our helper methods because we're going to be converting to pounds or to kilograms, and I just want to make sure that we have those. So if you don't know, this is how you convert kilograms to pounds, and this is how you convert pounds to kilograms. Kilograms are bigger, so you multiply. Pounds are smaller, so you divide. Then we have the preferred weight, which is just going to be a way to convert. This is just some spaghetti code I threw together, which is just checking if the weights unit, which is currently kilogram by default, if that is equal to kilograms and the unit you pass in is equal to pounds, then that means that we want this in pounds, but we currently have it in kilograms. So then we're just going to call weight kg to pounds and do the conversion. Else if it's the other case, so we want to return pounds to kilograms. And then finally, it's already in the right value. So in that case, or in the right units. So in that case, we're just going to return the current value. That's just a couple helper methods because we're going to be using those later. And then we're actually using one of those right here, which is going to be a before save convert to kilograms. And this is just going to be a private method down here, which is just going to do a convert, which just says if you initially input your weight as pounds, then we want to convert it to kilograms and set the unit to kilograms. Pretty self-explanatory there. Final thing, we want to make sure that we are validating the value. So that it has a presence of true and it has a numericality, because you don't want to be inputting like negative weights or just no weights at all. And that's our weight model, actually. We're already done in here. Now we have to come over to the user model, where we have to do a whole bunch of other stuff. So the first thing we're going to do is the has many weights here, dependent destroy, just to say, like, if we delete a user account, we want to delete their weights too. And I was actually messing with you. That's actually all we have to do in the user model as well. So now we've already gotten the models out of the way. The next thing we can do is go up to the controllers. So we'll come over to the controllers and the weights controller. In the weights controller, this is actually going to require a little bit of work. So the way I have this set up, we have the weights here in our index. We also need to, before action, authenticate user, because we want to make sure users are logged in no matter what. And then I actually want to paginate this. So we're going to start by doing a bundle add pagey, because bundle add pagey, because we're using the pagey gem right here, or the pagey gem. I don't know what it's called. Doesn't really matter. You don't have to know how to pronounce it to know how to use it. And then we can do a bin/dev again, or for the first time. We'll come over here. Now that we have the pagey gem, we need to add this to our, I think it's our application controller needs the back end. So do that in here. And then I think our application helper needs the front end, if I remember correctly. Let me check my notes. That is where the front end goes. So this is what's going to allow you to do your pagination on each page, and this is what's going to allow you to do it in the controllers. So in the controller itself, in the weights controller, we can now switch this. So first thing we want to do is we want this to be not the weight.all, but instead we want this to be the current user.weights, and we want to order this by the date in descending order, so you always see the newest weights first, right? And now we can actually just really quickly convert this logic into some paginated logic by doing pagey comma, and then we just wrap this in a pagey call like this. So we do this and this, and that now gives us our paginated search results. The next thing I want to do is we have a dashboard method that we're going to be creating here. So we're going to do that right before our index. This is where I showed the actual graph itself. So to do the dashboard, the first thing we want to do is grab some weights. So we're going to do a query for add weights is equal to current user dot weights, same thing we did up here. And then we're going to do dot where the date is set to a date range. Now, where is this date range coming from? Well, that's actually going to come from a concern that we put up here, which I just called waitable. So I'm super original. And then we're going to create this in our concerns folder in our controllers. And then inside of our concern here, we need to call this the concernable, or the concernable, a module waitable with a extend concern. I'm getting all my stuff confused. And then in here, we want to do a before action as an included before action, where we just set the default unit. And then we also have a private section down here where we do set default unit. So let's do the set default unit real quick. So this is just going to say at default unit is equal to cookies preferred unit, or if we haven't set cookies preferred unit yet, we're just going to set the preferred unit to kg. So this is what's powering all of those things that are doing all of those conversions for us. The other thing is that date range. So in our weights controller, we have this date range right here. Well, that's actually coming from a date range right here. So we're just going to say date range, and then we do a case on a params of time frame. So we're going to be passing back a time frame. That time frame will be in the format of like the number of days underscore, or sorry, the amount of time underscore, and then like the unit for that time. So like 7 underscore days, 30 underscore days, 90 underscore days. Then we have last underscore year, which should have really been like 365, but it can also be 366 in a leap year. And then we fall back to a weight of minimum to the current day. So this is like the first date recorded to the current day. So this is all time, right? So maybe you even want to say like all time weights, something like that. But I feel like it's self-explanatory at this point. So you use this date range in our weights controller here to get all of the weights in the desired weight range. Next, because we're averaging these, because I really didn't know with our graph here if it should just be like the most recent weight you entered for that date, or if it should be an average. I decided to do an average because I feel like it'd be helpful just to see how you can do averages. You can, of course, switch this to just use the most recent. But if you want to do an average in a case like this, you just group the dates and then you call average and then you pass what you want to average by. In this case, we're averaging by the value. And then finally, we do a respond to do format for our HTML. And then for JSON, we just render the averages. We do this because we're going to be using a stimulus controller to get the data for this graph. So when we call the dashboard endpoint, we want to be able to get some JSON back. And that's why we're rendering the averages like this. It just lets us very conveniently request them whenever we need to. But okay, that takes care of that. Next, in our create, we can do a wait.new here, but we're going to do a little bit of extra here where we merge in the user. There is a fancier way to do this where you can just like set the user as a default value in the model, but I really just didn't feel like doing that. Now we can come down here. We can actually get rid of the user ID because we don't need that since we're forcing it in a different way. So that takes care of that. And then we can also in here set the wait. Let's say you try to access this and you can't, then you just get redirected if you are not the current user. We're not doing any admins this time, so that's totally fine there. Okay, that takes care of that. Also, I'm realizing right now that we probably could have done an enum for the different unit types instead of doing magic strings everywhere. Maybe that's an exercise for the viewer. I have to leave for Frankenmuth in a little bit, so I'm going to leave that as my cop-out answer. We can come in here to the views and the layouts real quick. And in the application.html.erb file, we're going to create the quick little nav bar just so that we can, test stuff. So to do this, I'm just going to create a nav bar as opposed to using one from like a Tailwind repository. So outside of our main here, I'm going to say this is where our nav bar goes. This is not going to be a responsive nav bar or anything fancy. This is just a quick little way for us to see what's happening. So I'm going to come in here and refresh. It's going to tell us we need to run our migrations. I'm going to run those, and then we don't have a route set. So I'm going to come into our routes in config and routes.rb. And then in our routes file, we need to set the root of our application. I'm going to make that the weights controller dashboard action. And then optionally, if you want to, you can also just get the dashboard up here. That's totally fine and up to you. So this takes us here, and now you can see we have the nav bar right here, which just says home, weights, new weight, and then we have an ability to log in. So that's fine. But I also want to create links to the sign in and the sign up page if you haven't been, or if you're not like logged in yet and you want to just move to those real quick. So let's do that. So I'm going to come in here to my application.html again. And then in here, next to these, we're going to create, because these are the left side links, we're going to create links on the right side. And this is just our standard Devise login, logout stuff. So you can see here, it's a margin left auto, which means it's going to make this as big as possible. And if we refresh, pushes them over to the side. And then you can see right here, all we're doing is a sign out link, which means because we're in Rails 7, we have to use turbo method delete for links. And then if we're not signed in, we just say sign in or sign up. Or you could even change that to like create account. But that works for this. Cool. Next, we're going to come into the DB and the seeds file. In the seeds file, we want to create a bunch of test data. Now, first thing I want to do is real quick, just create a user account. So I'm going to say user find or create by dean@example.com with a password of password, standard stuff. We do that all the time. Now we're going to do stuff that's a little bit fancier. So we're going to create a method called create weight entries. It's going to take in a user, a start weight, a end weight, a start date, and an end date. And then we're going to do a quick little thing here. So we're going to say the daily weight loss is equal to the start weight minus the end weight, 2f, divided by the end date minus the start date, 2i. You don't really have to fully understand what this is doing. This is just creating like a gradual trend that we can follow as a way to just have some fake data here. We then set the current weight equal to the start weight. And then we go, all right, from the start date to the end date. So in my case, I'm going to do something like this. I'll put it down here. I'm going to call this method, and I'm going to pass in a start date of 2 years ago and the end date of today. So it's going to go from 2 years ago to today. We're going to create a new entry for each of those. So you can imagine we're going to be creating like 700 entries here. So then I'm going to say, all right, we need some kind of fluctuation, and you can actually just use fluctuation if you want to. So we're going to say rand -2 to 2. So it's going to be 2 pound or 4 pound fluctuation. And we're going to say the current weight is going to be minus equal to the daily weight loss, which is this amount right here, plus the fluctuation, which in this case, because we're going -2 to 2, could be quite a bit, but we'll see. last time it was a downwards trend. This can also be an upwards trend, or it can, move to the side, of course. Then we're going to say current weight is equal to the current weight and the end weight with a max. And then we're going to do a user.weights create with a date of this current date, a value of the current weight, and a unit of pounds. Or you can even change this to kg if you want to. Or you can even get rid of it, I think. And this will let us seed our database. So let's go ahead and let's do a Rails db:/seed to seed it real quick. So you can see that goes through 2 years worth of data, and then we can do a bin/dev. And then I can come over here and do a dean@example.com with a password of password. And now we have the ability to visit our application. Now you can see here we don't have a template yet for the dashboard. So we have to come up here to our weights, right click, new file, dashboard.html.erb. And now we can come over here and refresh, and that gets rid of that error. But now we have to put some stuff on this dashboard, right? So what do we want to put on here? Well, first thing we want to do is tell it that this is a weight tracker. So let's do that. So we have a data controller of weights. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you've used stimulus before, you'll recall that means we need a stimulus controller. So let's do a Rails G stimulus. Call this the weights controller. This is going to be the one that houses our Apex Charts graph. Okay, so now we have that. And then this is our title right here, or our header. Next, we're going to have a row, which we'll put down here. We'll close this, and then we'll close it again. Okay, so we have this row, and in this row, I want to do the 2 selects. So first select is going to be this one. It's going to have a data-action of change weights controller update action. So when we change this select, it's going to use the weights controller update chart action. Then it's got some Tailwind styling here to make it look pretty, and then it's got our different ranges. You'll probably recognize that the value here is the same as our concerns value. So this is where this time frame param is coming from. The 7 days, 30 days, 90 days last year is 7 days, 30 days, 90 days last year. And then all time is just going to be the default case that comes down here. Okay, so that's that. Now we need the thing to switch between the different units, so we can do that as well. This is going to be, again, in our weights controller, but this time it's going to be a toggle unit action. And then our values are going to be kg if the default unit is kg. We're going to set it to selected. And it's going to be lbs if the default unit is lbs. So that's just how we're setting which one is selected. The value is all lower cases, but the actual text that the user sees is properly capitalized. So that's that. Next, let's go ahead and let's create the stimulus logic here. So we come into our JavaScript controllers and our weights controller. So in our weights controller, we need to do a bunch of stuff. This is going to be probably one of the busiest areas in the application. So let's start in the connect. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to refresh and hit Control-Shift-I. You can see our drop-downs already exist, but they're not going to do anything right now. I just really want to see that it says Hello Stimulus here to make sure that our stimulus controller is working. Next, I want to import Apex Charts, which means we have to actually add Apex Charts. And because because import maps will forever be the cringiest thing imaginable, just pinning them doesn't seem to work. So what I had to do was come in here and pin Apex Charts. And then when that didn't work, I had to pin Apex Charts to this specific CDN right here, which is cdn.skypack.dev/Apex Charts at 3.33.1. And that allowed me to have this set up for it. It was really, really not fun figuring out why it wasn't working. Okay, now we can come in here and we can actually start messing around with this. So first thing I want to do is say this.unit is equal to this.getCookie preferred unit or kg. There's other ways to do this, but in this case, I thought it might be fun to do this in the JavaScript. So we'll come down here at the bottom, we'll say getCookie, and we're just going to return document.cookie.split. Split it by a semicolon, then we find the row that starts with the name, which is just the name of the cookie, which is the preferred unit cookie, and then we split it and we grab the first or the second element from it, sorry. This can also be done by coming into your dashboard, and this might be a good thing for you to try, and in here doing like a weights value, data-weights value equals, and then you want this to be the what will this be? It'd be like the at default unit, and then you can come in here and you could do a static values equals, and then this is going to be the default unit, I guess. default unit string. And then you could use this instead to get what the current default unit is. That's, I'm going to leave that again as an exercise for the viewer. It really depends on how you want to do this. In my case, I went with the JavaScript approach because I got to this point, I needed the cookie, and that was the fastest way to do it. Now, I do also need a way to set the cookie in here. So we'll do it like this. This just sets it to expire in the current date plus some time period, which I just have set to this little helper, days to milliseconds, which just returns days times this. This allows you to add a set period of time to your cookie to make sure it expires like a year or two in the future if you want to. Okay, then we set the cookie right here in our document.cookie. The reason why I cover this isn't because this is the most efficient way to do it. It's that sometimes you do need to actually set and get the cookie from JavaScript. So now you see ways to do that. But of course, I would probably just put it in the dashboard if I need to access it initially. But okay, now we can come up here after this .unit. We can say this .current time frame is equal to 7 days by default, because that's just what I have it set to by default. That's also why it resets to 7 days each time. We can then call this .unload chart, which we're also going to call here in our disconnect. And we do this because we just want to make sure that we don't have two charts appearing on the page, which will happen sometimes. So if we get to unload chart, we check if this .chart exists. If it does, we call destroy and we set it to null. It's just a helper method provided by Apex Charts. We just do that before we load the chart, just so that we're, in the good graces and don't have any problems show up here. So let's do load chart. Load chart is just going to be a fetch call to /dashboard, which is this dashboard page here. But remember, we gave it a JSON option, and then we pass in a time frame param of this .current time frame. Remember, that's where we were getting this from. And then that's where we're getting the response.json from. So we're just passing in the current time frame when we load the page. And then we're going to do a quick little request to our waitable concern. It says, all right, you need 7 days ago. So it grabs 7 days ago. And then it comes into the waits controller, and then it goes, the current user waits where the date range is 7 days ago, and then average all of the waits for the last 7 days and group it by the date. And then we just render that to the page. So we can come up here and then we call this .prepare chart data. So what does prepare chart data look like? We'll do that right below. Prepare chart data is just going to call converted data is going to be this .convert waits. So what does convert waits do? Well, convert waits, let me just tab all of this over. Convert waits is going to return an object add trees data. We're going to use a reducer for the result and the data value. And we're going to call wait. We're going to parse a float from that value. We're then going to set the result date equal to this units. If it's equal to pounds, we convert it to kilograms. Otherwise, we're going to return the weights. How do we convert it to kilograms? Is that a thing provided by JavaScript? Of course not. JavaScript doesn't even give us an ability to clamp values. So once again, we're going to come in here and we're going to convert to kilograms or pounds, just two little helpers that use the same constants as before. And then we're going to return the result of that. That's just going to convert it to the currently desired units. So now we have units in, let's say, pounds, for example. So now we need to have some formatted categories. What do formatted categories look like? Well, the formatted categories is just going to be a quick little call to a format categories helper where we grab the keys for the data and then we filter the dates. So we just filter by the current time frame. So we need to filter dates. How do we filter dates? Well, this is going to look exactly like our helper method. So we come in here and we do this, I guess, after the weights. So let me actually do this. We'll paste this in real quick. We'll tab it over. And then I want to make sure this is all organized in the order it appears in. So we'll do it like this. Okay, so we have our convert weights. We have our format categories. And then we have our filter dates. Filter dates is just going to check what the current time frame is set to. If it's set to last year or all time, we just get the current date. We set this to 90 days. Otherwise, we return true. Okay, so that allows us to do our formatted categories. Now we have the series data, which is going to be the formatted categories map, and we map this to the converted data. And finally, we call render charts. It takes a while to get here, but we do get here eventually. Next, we can say, all right, I want to render this chart. How do I render a chart? Well, this is going to use Apex Charts. You got to remember that. So first thing we need to do is we need to get some chart options. And this is where we actually do the styling of the chart. So below render chart, we're going to do the get chart options. This is going to return a series with a name of weight. This is just the title, and the data is going to be the series data. The series data is basically what we get back from the server itself that we then format with the categories in the series data. We then have the chart of type line, a height of 350, and a toolbar show false. You can also set this to true if you want to. I'll show you what that does in a second here. The stroke is set to smooth, which is just the thing that makes it have those wavy lines as opposed to like jagged lines. We set the x-axis to have the categories. So that's just our date range, which we kind of have to change, depending on how we want the dates to be labeled. And then the y-axis labels use a formatter where the value is it's truncated to 2 decimal places. So all of that you can do through Apex Charts, which is very nice. So we render the chart, or we get the chart options. We then come in here and we say this .chart.update options. And then we pass in the chart options. We then have another option here where we don't update it. We create a new one. So we say this .apex charts query selector for chart. So in here, we're using a query selector. So we have to actually make sure that we're putting this on the page. As soon as I can find my dashboard here, I can copy this over. So we're going to do this below the container for all of the selects. We're just going to create a new little div with an ID of chart. That just allows us to grab that chart real quick. And then we are good to go here. Now, I think we're missing a method here. It's probably going to be the toggle unit helper. So we'll do that real quick. So to toggle the unit, we're going to say this.unit equals event.target.value. So when you click on the unit dropdown and you, let's say, select LBS, it'll then get LBS from here, sets the preferred unit, sets a length of 7 days. That's why we have set cookie with a value in here. A console logs that the unit has been set, and then it calls load chart, and load chart says I already have a chart, so I need to fetch data, and then I come down here and I render a chart where I already have a chart, so I just update the chart. Other thing we need to do is actually have the update chart action here. We can do that real quick by just saying current time frame equals the event.target.value. This time, instead of doing the weights, we're doing the time frame here. So when we change this, we call update chart. Update chart fires, sets the current time frame, and then calls load chart again. And that is pretty much that. Now there's another one that I'm missing here, which I think is the, it's going to be the format data labels. Let me check. Format date label right here. This format date label needs to still be created. So let's do that right here. Okay. So to format the date label for these categories, we have to do a little bit of fancy math here. This is why I saved this for the end. First thing we have to do is we take in a date string that we want. We then have to create a new date where we set the date string plus the T000000 because we need to make sure that the date is properly formatted, but then we have to append Z because we need to interpret this as UTC if the server sends UTC dates. In my case, this was causing a off by 1 bug, where if I didn't have this at a specific time of day, I was getting like all of the data for today, but with yesterday's date attached to it for some reason. That was really annoying. Then we can do the options here. So if it's set to all time, we just do year numeric, month short, date numeric, time zone UTC. These are options for Apex Charts. If it's not set to all time, then we just do a short numeric UTC. So we leave off the year right here. So this is where we're getting that option where when we filter by all time, we get the current year. Otherwise, we don't get the year attached to it because you know which year you're looking at probably. And then finally, we just return the locale string for ENUS with the options attached to it. Okay, so that looks good to me. Now let's come over here and let's refresh the page real quick. And you can see here we get a chart. Now, if we switch this to kg, we get the kg. If we refresh, we're still on kg. If we switch to pounds and then we refresh, we're still on pounds because we're storing this in that cookie. We can switch the time frame here. You can see here, this changes just fine. And then if we come down here to all time, you'll see your years attached because we're using that format date label here. So that's pretty cool. But now we have to clean up the rest of this because if we come over to the weights themselves, these look awful. And if we try to edit these, we don't have any of that cool functionality in here. So let's do that real quick. I'm gonna start by closing all of this because we don't need all of these things open anymore. And then I'm gonna come into the form and the weight partial. So let's start by coming into the weight partial itself. So in the weight partial, I don't want the user ID anymore because that's really not a great way to do this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a header. I'm just gonna get rid of all this. We're gonna have a header here where the weight is set to weight.preferred value. Remember, in our weight.rb, we have the preferred value here, which just converts it to either kilograms or pounds, depending on what you have set as your default unit. So we pass in the default unit, we truncate it to 2 decimal places so it's readable, and then we have the default unit set here. So let's just save this, and we'll see this value here go to 177.93 pounds, which is cool. Now we want to say what date you set this value at. So this is set for May 6th, okay? And then finally, we want to have the show action at the bottom here. So that's just what we had before, which just says if you're on the show page, do this. If you're somewhere else, do something else. So we are currently on the show page, which means we're not going to see these. But if we go back to the weights, we'll now see show weight and edit this weight. Now there's, of course, another button here that we have to get rid of, but we'll deal with that in a second. So this is now our weight partial. Looks a lot better. Let's come into the index page. Because on the index page, we have to make sure this looks okay. In the index page, we have a notice up top. We have content for the title. Then we need the weights right here. Then we have a loop for all of the weights. So in the loop here, we have this show link. I'm going to get rid of this. We have the @weights.each do weight. I'm going to actually do it like this. Put in our pagey. This does need 2 equal signs here instead of 1. And then we're going to render the @weights instead, just like that. Now we can come over here and we can refresh. And now we have show this weight or edit this weight. And we have our buttons up here. But you'll see our buttons look terrible. So let's fix that real quick. To fix the buttons, you can go to the Pagey documentation, and then you can go to their actual doc site. And then in their doc site somewhere, they show you how to customize it. So you can see that here, I think. And then you can go through here if you want to customize it with Tailwind. And then they give you some code there. But I'm just going to give you what I came up with. So we're going to come into style sheets, and we're going to create a new style sheet, new file, pagey.tailwind.css. And then in here, we're going to do a apply for the pagey, pagey A, the hover, the current, and the links that are not the current, that are not a current link. So if we do that, we can come over here, we can refresh, and you'll see that nothing changes. Why does nothing change? Well, nothing changes because we need to import this. So we'll come up to the top of our application.tailwind.css. We'll import the style sheet, and now you can see this has changed just like you would expect it to. So the current page is not a link, and then everything else is still enabled for you. So we'll go back to page 1 real quick. Cool, so that works. Now let's come into the show page. Let's click on edit, and now let's fix the form so we can call it a day. Fixing the form, unfortunately, is a bit deceptive because there is quite a bit of logic that I had in here, if you'll recall, all of the conversion and stuff. So we have to make sure that we do that just fine. But for now, what we'll do is we'll get rid of the user ID because we're not using that. We're going to start with our errors. We'll collapse the errors so that we don't see those. We need to attach some data to the form. So I'm going to do a comma, and then we're going to do our data. The data is going to have a controller of weight-form. So we have to create a stimulus controller, and it's going to have a weight form default unit value of @default unit. So this is where I said you could do it either through the data itself or through the back end, or you can set the cookies from the front end. So in this case, I'm going to do it from the form just to show you that this is an option. And then I'm going to do a Rails G stimulus of weight form to generate a weight form controller for us. And I'll do a bin/dev again. Okay, so in the weight form controller, this one's actually a lot simpler than the last one, thankfully. Sometimes these get really involved. Sometimes they're not too bad. We need to have 2 targets and a value. The value is going to be the default unit, just like I said. And then we're going to have an input and a unit. So what is the input and the unit? Let's set those up real quick because I feel like those will be important to sort of understand. So we have our value here. Our value is going to be a little bit deceptive. Instead of having just a text field here, we're going to have a text field that has a step of 0.1, a placeholder of your weight. And this is actually going to have the data attached to it. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to tab this over, hit enter here, hit enter here, and hit enter here. So you have your weight form target of input. That's going to be this text field right here for the value. Then you need to have your date. Your date's already set up down here. We need to make sure that we have the spacing set though. So this is where we got to do this. We're going to tab this text field over one. After the text field, I want to have a options for select for our unit. Let me tab all of this over. So next to the input for the unit or for the value, I want to have a select for the unit where you have an option to select either kg or lbs. And our default unit is going to be the weight.unit because this can't be the default unit right here because the default unit is going to be different than how we have this stored in the database. So we have to make sure that this is literally how this is currently stored as the weight, just to make sure that it's the same. If you ever change your default to, let's say, not have kg, then this logic would break if you like hard code this or if you use something else. So just make sure you're using the weights unit here just for the sake of making sure this still works. Now we can save this. We can come over to the weight form controller and we can finish up in here because we have the input and the unit here because we have the unit right here. So let's just make sure that this is set up right. So in our connect, we need to say the default unit is this default unit value. If the default unit is not equal to the unit target value, so let's say we've switched this, we then need to call change unit. Changing the unit is just a simple call to change unit, where the current unit is the unit target value. We say current unit, if it's pounds, change it to kg, otherwise set it to pounds. And then finally, we need to have our conversion, and our conversion is once again going to be weight parse float for the input target. Current unit is going to be this unit target.value. We check if the weight is not a number. And then this seems a little bit backwards, but basically what we're doing here is if it's set to pounds, we need to make sure that we convert it to pounds. So we do that conversion. And if it's set to kilograms, we need to make sure we convert it to kilograms. And so it kind of seems a little bit backwards here, but if we come over here and we refresh, you'll see that it's currently set to pounds. If we set it to kilograms, the number gets smaller. If we change it back, the number gets bigger. And that allows us to set this. But now we have this unit at the bottom of our form. We need to get rid of this unit. So we'll do that, refresh, and now we have a working application. Okay, sorry, this was a bit of a longer one. There was a lot that went into this, but I wanted to make sure that everything worked as expected. But let's go ahead and let's test this real quick. Let's create a new weight for today, which is the 6th, and we'll set it to like 400 pounds just so that we can make sure this is working. So say 400 pounds for today. So I'll click on this. We get our nice little drop down, click create weight, go to home. Now we can see a massive spike here as this is set to 289 because it's an average of like 176 and 400, which we expect to be somewhere around 300 pounds minus a little bit because this is below 200 pounds, right? But anyways, that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you got something out of this. I thought this was a cool little project, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.